So what are unhealthy and healthy ways to regulate emotions? Whenever we feel uncomfortable emotions, whether it's anxiety, guilt, shame, sadness, we tend to want to avoid these emotions, to escape from them in the moment. And we find all different ways to regulate these emotions in the moment. Some of these strategies can be helpful in the long term, and some can be unhelpful in the long term. So I do a lot of work with teenagers. And teenagers can come up with all different unhealthy emotion regulation strategies that are really common and can continue into adulthood. So for example, if a teen is really nervous about going to a party with their friends, they might engage in drinking behavior, drinking alcohol beforehand. Or if a teen feels really ashamed or guilty after an experience in school socially, they might engage in self-harming behaviors. Another teen might feel really sad and alone and try to regulate or change that emotion by lashing out at their parents or showing anger. So all three of these examples are examples of unhealthy emotion regulation strategies. In the moment, they can absolutely shift or change the emotion. And in the long term, these aren't strategies that are going to help us get closer to our goals that are sustainable over time. So what are healthier emotion regulation strategies? There are a myriad of different emotion regulation strategies. There are countless emotion regulation strategies out there than I can list in this one video. And the number one piece of advice that I tend to have for parents, caregivers, teachers is to get curious, to try out different emotion regulation strategies with your child or teen and figure out what works for them. So for example, I noticed for myself after a long day at work, if I was feeling anxious or kind of worn down, I used distraction oftentimes. I would go on my phone or watch television. And I noticed in the long term, this was making me feel more anxious, more depleted of energy. And so I tried out something different. I decided to go for a power walk with my dog for 10 minutes. And I noticed this both reduced my anxiety and helped shift the emotion moment. This is what worked for me. And that's not to say that this would work for someone else. And so I think that's why it's so important both to model different emotion regulation strategies for your child and to try out different ones, discuss it. How would this work in the long term? What would be some barriers that might come up with this strategy? Some strategies work in some settings and don't work in the others. So for example, some kids I work with will listen to music on their phone or with their headphones when they're feeling an intense emotion. This may not work in school if you're not allowed to have your phone in those moments. We may have to come up with a different strategy, like doing 10 jumping jacks in the bathroom stall or something to quiet the emotions in the moment. So my number one piece of advice is to get curious, try out different strategies, see what works for you and your child. So how can parents and caregivers and teachers encourage healthy emotion regulation? My first piece of advice is to first validate and find out more about the emotion. So it can be so tempting as an adult when you know lots of different coping strategies and may have been through similar situations before to jump to problem solving. And what tends to happen when we jump in with problem solving or use this coping skill, take a deep breath, is it inadvertently creates a barrier to that child or teen using that coping skill and can create a feeling of misunderstanding. If you think to yourself about a time when you felt an intense emotion recently, and if someone had jumped in with problem solving that moment, like just take a deep breath or meditate for 2 minutes, it probably would have felt invalidating and increased the emotions in the moment for you. And this is true for most people. So one of the things that caregivers, parents, teachers can do is to first validate, to communicate that they understand the emotion in the moment. So it makes sense you're feeling anxious. I can totally understand why you might feel sad right now. Of course, the first day of school is hard, given last year was really tough for you. And then the important piece here is to stick the landing, to not say anything else, just to wait for a moment with that feeling. It can be easy to rush in and say, but you really should take a deep breath here. Or, but you need to get into school right now. And to be able to validate and stick with that for a moment. Then proposing some different emotion regulation skills or coping skills. And ideally, these would be talked about in advance. It's really hard to try out a new coping skill when you haven't tried it before, haven't practiced it before, don't know how it's going to work for you. And so typically I'll tell parents, caregivers, teachers, come up with 2 or 3 skills in advance that you'll practice with the child, and then they have those in their back pocket in the moment.